Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story, the Chinese consul general in New York has left office after prosecutors arrested a former aide to two New York governors. Current Governor Kathy Hochul says she requested the diplomat's expulsion. The U.S. confirming it could co-produce weapons with Taiwan in the future, as the island is threatened by the Chinese regime.
U.S. now is working with a number of partners, and I would not rule out Taiwan being one of those partners in the future.
A high-ranking Pentagon official is set to attend China's top annual military forum next week. He's more senior than U.S. officials who have attended in the past. And a survivor of the Chinese regime's forced organ removal is telling his story today in Washington, D.C. He's one of many who have suffered torture and imprisonment under a prolonged persecution in China. China's consul general in New York has left office. The State Department said he left as scheduled after completing his term. This comes as New York Governor Kathy Hochul said she requested his expulsion after her former aide was charged with secretly acting as a Chinese agent. But the Chinese consulate in New York said the diplomat is performing his normal duties. Here's more.
According to the State Department, China's consul general in New York is no longer in position, as scheduled after completing his posting.
Foreign interference, including attempts to influence through covert activities that should be registered under the Foreign Agents Registration Act and are not registered, are things that we take very seriously, as you saw by the action the Department of Justice took yesterday.
The drama comes a day after U.S. prosecutors arrested Linda's son, former aide to New York Governor Kathy Hochul and former Governor Andrew Cuomo. Hochul called son's alleged behavior a betrayal of New Yorkers and the American people.
The indictment lays out very clearly evidence that these actions taken by Linda's son were an absolute betrayal of the trust of two administrations in state government, lying and misleading to these administrations, breaking our ethics rules, and even forging my signature on documents.
Prosecutors accused Son of forging Hochul's signatures on invitation letters to a Chinese delegation. The letter helped them secure visas to the U.S. According to prosecutors, Son influenced what Hochul said and didn't say. The indictment says that in 2021, Son told a Chinese official that she wouldn't allow Hochul to mention Beijing's mass detention of Uyghurs in her speech, adding that she had argued with Hochul's speechwriter. There was no mention of the Uyghurs in Hochul's public Lunar New Year message that year. Prosecutors also accused Son of adding a Chinese official to a private call for New York state government leaders in 2020. The call was about New York's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The Chinese official had not been invited. And then there's Taiwan. The indictment says that in 2019, Son wrote to a Chinese official that she managed to stop all relations between TECO and New York State. TECO is Taiwan's de facto embassy in the U.S. Son wrote that she had denied all requests from TECO's office. According to the indictment, she was working under Cuomo at the time. In 2016, Son allegedly told a Chinese official that TECO had invited Hochul to appear at Select USA, a summit in Washington, D.C., adding that she was working to resolve the issue. Later, Hochul went to a Select USA reception hosted by the Chinese embassy, instead of the one held by Taiwan. Prosecutors allege that Son and her husband, Chris Wu, received substantial economic benefits from the Chinese regime, who is accused of orchestrating the transfer of millions of dollars in kickbacks from China. Son and Hu have both pleaded not guilty to all charges and have been released on bond. Their court hearing is scheduled for September 25th.
Washington is reiterating its commitment to Taiwan. The de facto U.S. ambassador said Wednesday the U.S. will not rule out the possibility of jointly producing weapons with the island.
U.S. now is working with a number of partners, looking at, with a number of partners at possibilities of expanding our joint production of military materiel and supplies. And I would not rule out Taiwan being one of those partners in the future.
Right now, Taiwan buys weapons from the U.S., but is still waiting for over $20 billion worth of those weapons to be delivered. The Chinese Communist Party claims Taiwan as part of its territory, despite never having ruled it. The U.S. doesn't have diplomatic relations with Taiwan, but is bound by law to sell weapons so the island can defend itself. Greene also said the U.S. is building a network of alliances in the Indo-Pacific region to boost defense capabilities, as Taiwan is not the only target of Beijing's coercion. The U.S. is set to send a high-ranking Pentagon official to China's top annual security forum next Thursday, a U.S. official told Reuters. The official is Michael Chase, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for China, Taiwan, and Mongolia. He's more senior than previous U.S. officials who have attended the forum. Over 90 countries and organizations are expected to send delegations to the conference. The Security Forum resumed last year after a 3-year hiatus due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Washington sent an official at the time, and it was a sign of thawing military ties. But that official had a lower rank than Chase. China suspended military dialogue with the U.S. in 2022, following then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. Beijing's aggression in waters near Taiwan and in the South China Sea remain contentious flashpoints in U.S.-China relations. Is the arrest of the New York governor's former top aide just the tip of the iceberg? To discuss the Chinese regime's overseas spy network and transnational repression, we sat down with Casey Fleming, CEO of business warfare and counterintelligence company Black Ops Partners. And the indictment adds that Sun was able to remove references to human rights issues from one of the Governor Hochul's speeches, for example, the quote Uyghur situation. Now, if Sun is found guilty, what does this mean for a free country like the United States, that a suspected foreign agent can have that much access to an elected official?
That's a huge area of concern, really, to each American. It's your freedom of speech, it's your national security, it's all those things that are on the table here. This person and her husband, by the way, and he was on his own mission, but they both got indicted. But this person was part of the state government at the highest levels for 10 years and all the way up into the governor's office, and really there to subvert the American way, the American law, and our trust in state government. So as well as money laundering by buying properties and assets and so on. So there's, as well as giving access to Chinese officials that should not have been given access, unlawful entry into the United States, changing agenda items, removing Taiwan from discussions, those type of things. So that is going against free speech, and it's advancing the communist threat inside of America. This is not, by the way, again, this is not one-off. This is something happening in every state and local government, as well as our federal government.
Extremely concerning. And how does the Chinese regime then utilize a spy network overseas? What is Beijing getting out of all of this?
The first thing is they're getting espionage. And through espionage, they're getting who's powerful inside the United States, what our strategies are, what our negotiations are, our tactics, those kind of things. On the business side, they steal intellectual property to take those industries over to China and rob our economy from the intellectual property and the revenue and the national security and the jobs that it produces. So it's a fight to the finish. It's the Chinese Communist Party's attempt, and they're doing a very good job of it, of weakening the U.S. by all means necessary. The textbook term for that is called unrestricted warfare.
Now, the Washington Post has a new piece out on the Chinese regime's influence in New York City as an example of transnational repression. Now, this builds on what we've been reporting on here for years. What is the most effective or worrisome aspect to you of Beijing's transnational repression campaign?
The transnational repression campaign really shuts down free speech, and it enforces the communist regime worldwide. So it's those two things. It's restricting free speech in all means necessary to protect the Chinese mission and the Chinese regime. And to every American and everyone in the free world, that should be very concerning.
Casey Fleming, CEO of Black Ops Partners, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
House Republicans plan to put forth a dozen bills to counter the influence of the Chinese Communist Party and safeguard American interests. NTD's Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more.
Speaker of the House Mike Johnson is moving ahead with a foreign policy platform he unveiled earlier this summer.
China poses the greatest threat to global peace. Congress must keep our focus on countering China with every tool at our disposal. The House will be voting on a series of bills to empower the next administration to hit our enemies' economies on day one.
At least 12 bills related to countering the influence of the Chinese Communist Party are on the agenda for when Congress reconvenes next week.
Our goal is to have a significant package of China-related legislation signed into law by the end of this year. I'm very hopeful that much of this can be bipartisan.
Amongst those legislations is a bill that would restrict the Department of Homeland Security from funding universities that are receiving financing from the Chinese Communist Party.
It's an interconnected web of threats. I refer to it as a China-led axis composed of partner regimes in Russia, Iran, North Korea, Venezuela, and even Cuba.
The End Chinese Dominance of Electric Vehicles in America Act would restrict clean vehicle tax credits only to those EVs with domestically manufactured batteries. The Protecting American Agriculture from Foreign Adversaries Act would make it harder for foreign nationals to own farmland in the U.S. And the Protecting Innovation and Economic Security from the CCP would establish a China-focused division in the Justice Department. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
A survivor's harrowing tale featured in a Wednesday press conference by the organization Stop Organ Harvesting by CCP in Washington, D.C. Chen Pei-ming is joined by several prominent human rights activists to make his story known. NTD's Sam Wong has more on the story.
The world's first known survivor of China's state-sponsored forced organ removal spoke out on Wednesday. His testimony comes in response to claims from the Chinese Communist Party questioning his account.
Today, as I stand here, I may appear normal. I walk and speak normally, but in reality, I can never return to the person I once was.
In his previous testimonies, 59-year-old Chen Pei-ming recalled being forcibly injected by prison guards and waking up shackled to a hospital bed. Medical exams suggest part of his liver went missing, along with a portion of his lung. He was left with a 13-inch long incision on the side of his chest and chronic pain.
The 35-centimeter scar on my left rib cage throbs with every beat of my pulse. And with each beat, the pain is unbearable.
Experts said the CCP's reply confirmed a few things. Namely, Chen was sentenced for 8 years due to his faith. And a hospital performed the surgery without his consent, which left a scar on his body.
Well, they confirmed it. I mean, it's now for the doctors. We've been through several years now of independent experts looking at this case, and they say some things are missing.
Chen is one of many who have suffered under the Chinese regime's nationwide persecution campaign against Falun Gong, a spiritual practice known for its health benefits and moral teachings. Since July 1999, practitioners in China have been subjected to incarceration, forced labor, torture, and even death. A U.S. State Department report suggests an untold number of them have had their organs forcibly removed to supply the Chinese regime's billion-dollar transplant industry.
It's solidified my own instinct and belief after reviewing his file, after meeting him, after seeing his scar, after seeing the scans, that he indeed was a victim of forced organ harvesting.
Back in June, the U.S. House unanimously passed the Falun Gong Protection Act, a bill to sanction anyone involved in Beijing's practice of forced organ harvesting. The legislation has been introduced to the upper chamber by Senator Marco Rubio. Reporting from Capitol Hill, Sam Wong, NTD News.
Coming up, more politicians focus on highlighting their tough on China policies, hoping to gain more support from voters during this election cycle. We look at what's driving the trend. Did Taiwan really take business from the U.S. chip industry? Taiwan's economic minister pushes back against a comment made by former President Trump. Catch the full response. And 2 regulators are calling for an investigation into Shein and Temu. Both companies are accused of selling deadly baby and toddler products. More on that after the break here on China in Focus. Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. China, which some U.S. lawmakers have called the foremost adversary to the United States, is now a central focus in political campaigns across the country. More than 170 election ads are highlighting candidates' tough stances on China, aiming to gain more support from American voters. The ad impact database of political ads shows that during this election cycle, there have been 171 campaign ads for congressional or presidential candidates that mention China. These ads have emerged as tensions between the U.S. and China continue to mount. Political consultants suggest that many American voters view China unfavorably, associating the country with intellectual property theft, the COVID-19 pandemic, the fentanyl crisis, and other issues. And a tough stance on China has become more bipartisan than in the past. Democratic candidates have produced the majority of China-related ads in this cycle, while 4 years ago, GOP candidates published over 80% of such ads. The growing number of China-related political ads does suggest one thing: a future Congress could be even tougher on the Chinese Communist Party. Taiwan's economic minister said on Monday that former President Trump might misunderstand Taiwan's role in the chip industry. The minister made the comment in response to a question about whether Taiwan would try to dissuade Trump from targeting its chip industry if he's re-elected. America First is a key component of Trump's presidential campaign. And back in July, Trump suggested that Taiwan had taken semiconductor business from the U.S. The minister denied that claim, explaining that Taiwan manufactures chips based on U.S. orders and that U.S. companies have the highest profit margins. He said there is a complementary relationship between the two countries' industries. He also said he believes Trump might be misinformed about the situation due to having, quote, a lot on his plate or being misled by Taiwan's competitors. China is eyeing the talents in Taiwan's chips industry. Taiwan on Tuesday said it's investigating 8 Chinese companies, saying they illegally recruited high-tech professionals from Taiwan's semiconductor industry. One firm is accused of poaching nearly 100 people from Taiwan. The Chinese companies under investigation include high-end semiconductor equipment manufacturers and R&D firms. At least one firm is funded directly by China's Ministry of Finance. Another is controlled by a state-owned company, the China National Nuclear Corporation, which works with military and nuclear technologies. 2 major Chinese-owned e-commerce sites are under U.S. scrutiny. 2 leaders of the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission are calling for an investigation into Shein and Temu. They say deadly baby and toddler products are sold on both websites.
Shein and Temu are known for selling things at low prices. They take advantage of a rule called de minimis. Under it, packages valued less than $800 are exempt from tariffs. That's if they are shipped from China directly to U.S. consumers. Critics say the de minimis rule contributed to Shein and Temu's success in the U.S. The rule was put in place to allow Americans to bring back souvenirs brought overseas duty-free. But retailers are also taking advantage of it. In 2020, de minimis imports rose to over $67 billion.
New Zealand's spy service is calling China a complex intelligence concern. The agency's annual report warns that Beijing is carrying out activities that are, quote, complex and deceptive. Intelligence officials accuse China of using front organizations to infiltrate communities in New Zealand and promote political views favored by the Chinese Communist Party. Worth noting, China is New Zealand's largest trading partner, but under its recently elected government, New Zealand has been moving closer to its Western allies on foreign policy. China's aggression in the South China Sea is escalating, and another major power in Asia, India, is making its stance clear on the tensions without explicitly naming China. Here's Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Wednesday.
Freedom of navigation.
We support freedom of navigation and overflight under international laws like UNCLOS, United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. We support an agreement on the Code of Conduct for the region. India supports a policy of development, not expansionism.
The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea provides a framework for global maritime navigation and regulates the use of marine resources. But China claims almost the entire South China Sea, and its Coast Guard often blocks or harasses foreign vessels passing through. In 2016, an international tribunal ruled that most of China's maritime claims in the region were unlawful. In August of 2024, the New York Times published a series of stories alleging abuse within Shein Performing Arts. The arts company, whose mission is to revive traditional culture through classical Chinese dance, is now accused of coercive practices. But many Shein artists have spoken out against the articles, saying the paper misrepresents them. So what's the real story? The Epoch Times' Yanya Kellick sat down with those who are most affected to hear their stories. Take a listen.
I remember that night, we sat down and started writing the experiences that they've been through over the years, well into like midnight. How could this be happening? Like an environment that has given us so much and helped us grow so much, like why is it getting tarnished like this? We really wanted to speak up and we wanted to, share our stories.
Do you have a sense of what elite training looks like?
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
There's this New York Times article that's come out that has painted an extremely different picture. How do you react to that?
From my experience, it's quite the opposite.
I think it's unjust. You have this wonderful group of people with personalities and their interests, their hobbies.
Since I've been here, I got hope for myself.
Jumping is easy, right? They watch you, but getting up, you watch.
Like jumping up.
No, you watch them. You watch because
that's the same for us.
They have steps. They don't like.
I think we're done here.
We're actually pretty crazy.
Okay, thank you.
This special episode of American Thought Leaders is airing on NTD's cable channel Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern. Coming up on NTD, stay tuned for America's Hope with Kelly Wright. The CHAMPS monitoring program is helping boys to discover their true value and worth. Vondell Singleton, founder of CHAMPS, talks to Kelly Wright about how the program educates, empowers, and exposes the boys how to live their best life now. CHAMPS teaches each child to discover they are born to win. That's tonight at 10 p.m. after China in Focus. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.